Look familiar? I don't think anyone needs to be introduced to the Ark of the Covenant. There is hardly a person who is not familiar with this object. And if such a person still exists, then it's enough to type these words on the internet to see dozens, if not hundreds, of versions. In this film, I will venture to suggest one more, mine. So one more will exist out there. With that, let's start with the device. There are several versions, more or less detailed, about how the ark was arranged, but I will refer to the original source, the Bible. Now they shall construct an ark of acacia wood 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. You shall overlay it with pure gold, inside and out you shall overlay it, and you shall make a gold molding around it. You shall also cast 4 gold rings for it, and fasten them on its 4 feet. 2 rings shall be on one side of it, and 2 rings on the other side of it. And you shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark with them. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark. They shall not be removed from it. You shall put into the ark the testimony which I shall give you. And you shall make an atoning cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. You shall make 2 cherubims of gold. Make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the atoning cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and 1 cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim of one piece with the atoning cover at its 2 ends. And the cherubim shall have their wings spread upward, covering the atoning cover with their wings and facing one another. The faces of the cherubim are to be turned toward the atoning cover. Then you shall put the atoning cover on top of the ark. And in the ark you shall put the testimony which I will give to you. There I will meet with you, and from above the atoning cover, from between the 2 cherubim which are upon the ark of the testimony, I will speak to you about every commandment that I will give you for the sons of Israel. Exodus 25. So what becomes clear from this text? First is dimensions. Width and height 1.5 cubits, length of 2.5. Let's recall that the ancient Egyptian cubit is 52 centimeters. The ark was made by the Jews. They came from Egypt. So this is that same cubit. We get a box with a length of 130 centimeters, width and height of 78 centimeters. Second is the material. The ark is made of wood and covered with gold on both sides. That is, a layer of gold, a layer of wood, and another layer of gold. Third is the device, the main box. 4 rings at the 4 bottom corners. 2 wooden poles are threaded through these rings, making it comfortable for 4 people to carry it on their shoulders. The lid is made of gold with 2 winged figures in the center. The wings of the figures are directed towards each other. A revelation from God was placed inside the box, which later turned out to be 2 stone plates, which were called tablets. And the fourth is a certain element of mysticism. God will manifest himself above the lid, in the middle between the 2 winged figures. If we discard the embellishments, then we end up with a wooden chest with 2 layers of gilding, inside and outside, with a gold lid and 2 winged figures on top. Inside the chest there are 2 stone plates and some kind of physical process of short-term action between the figures on the lid. There are many versions of how much this could weigh, but the average is about 250 kilograms. Since the ark was carried by 4 people, this weight was distributed accordingly among the 4. It turned out to be approximately 62 kilograms per person. Of course, this is very heavy. But there is information that the Levites who were allowed to carry the ark were in no hurry to get in line, tired quickly, and changed many times. The evidence that the ark allegedly carried its carriers by itself, in my opinion, is nothing more than a fairy tale invented for the rest of the people, in order to not discourage the desire to carry the ark at all. So we have a layer of gold, a layer of wood, and again a layer of gold. What does that look like? Well, let's go without intrigue. It looks like a classic electrical capacitor device. Let's recall the general definition of capacitors. In its simplest form, The structure consists of two plate-shaped electrodes called plates, separated by a dielectric. In this case, the electrodes of the lining are the layers of gold, and the wood between them is the dielectric. Gold is an excellent electrical conductor and does not oxidize like other metals when exposed to air. In general, we have before us an electrical capacitor, made not in the form of a roll we are accustomed to, but in the form of a box with a useful space inside. And there were reasons for that. Further, the cover is a pure conductor without a dielectric and serves as a resistor and a circuit breaker, a kind of switch. Lift the lid, open the circuit. The capacitor is inactive. Close the lid, the circuit is closed. The capacitor is ready for operation. Gold has a resistance of 1.5 times higher than silver and copper, and as is known, the greater the resistance, the longer the capacitor holds the charge. Let's skip for now the safety precautions when working with a bare conductor. Of course, this was taken into account, but more on that later. Now the most interesting thing is the two cherubs on the lid. Two winged figures direct their outstretched wings towards each other. What is this? Well, this is the most common arrestor of the most common closed electrical circuit. Yes, the same spark gap that was shown to us in physics classes at school, without which there is no oscillatory circuit. It serves to relieve excess voltage. If it is not provided, then the excess voltage will come out in any random place and will be called a capacitor breakdown. After such a breakdown, the capacitor breaks down and as a rule cannot accumulate an electrical charge. If the Ark of the Covenant was an electrical capacitor, then the engineer or engineers who designed it had to provide an arrestor. And sparking and a smoke screen between the electrodes of the arrestor is a common external effect when it is triggered. Here is that manifestation of God's presence over the lid. At this point, anyone who understands electrical engineering will say, well, okay, a capacitor. So what's next? For a closed electrical circuit, this is not enough. In order for a capacitor to gain capacity, an EMF is needed, or more simply, an electrical charge. And for a charge you need a generator. And now is the time to remember the two tablets. That is, the stone plates that were placed inside the ark. But how can you create an electrical charge with the help of two stone slabs, you say? Turns out that it's possible, and not even difficult. There is such a thing called piezoceramic patches. It's freely available on Amazon. When you press on it, a microcharge is generated. If these presses are continued, then the charge will be generated continuously until the presses stop. This charge can be caught and accumulated, if you know how. To not spend a lot of time explaining, please watch this video. As they say, it is better to see something once than to hear it 100 times. We connect the piezo patch to the multimeter and start pressing. The device starts to show the generation of the charge. Press, charge generates. Let go, charge disappears. Now add the simplest capacitor to the circuit. Through a diode so as not to lose the charge. Again, connect to the multimeter and press the patch. As we can see, the charge is generated, but now it does not disappear, but accumulates in the capacitor. The more we press, the more charge is accumulated, thus increasing the voltage in the capacitor. What did we just see? We saw the generation of an electric charge using a piezoelectric device. So what does that have to do with the stone plates inside the ark? Well, that they were, in fact, the piezoelectric devices. Here is a short definition of piezoelectricity. It is the phenomenon of the appearance of electric charges on the surface of crystals during their deformation. This is a direct piezoelectric effect. In simple words, if you take two crystals and hit one on the other, then for a short moment the crystals will polarize, and an electric charge will arise between different poles. There is an inverse piezoelectric effect. This is the occurrence of mechanical deformations on the surface of crystals under the impact of an electric field. Both effects are observed in the same crystals, piezoelectric materials. The most famous natural piezoelectric is quartz. Stone tablets could have been made of quartz stone such as quartzite, which automatically makes them piezoelectric. And the principle of operation is simple, like everything ingenious. You needed to cut two stone plates according to the internal dimensions of the arc, put them on the bottom, one on top of the other, take the arc, and go. That's it. In the process of walking of any person, an oscillatory up and down movement occurs. This is due to walking on two legs. Even when neglecting the unevenness of the surface on which we are walking, at the point of transferring the body through a straight leg, the body will be in a maximum upper position. And at the point in the middle of the step, the body drops to its furthest low position. The amplitude of oscillation between these points when walking will be very small. We don't pay attention to it unless we pick up something with a sensitive surface level. For example, a bucket of water. 2 is better for the sake of the experiment, in order to balance the sides. 2 identical buckets with the same amount of water will begin to spill out after a few steps if you do not deliberately extinguish these vibrations with your hands. But 2 buckets of water are 20 kilograms, and the ark weighed 250 kilograms. And they did not carry it along an asphalt road, and I'm sure not always in step. There were 4 carriers. All these vibrations during the transfer of the ark provided a sufficient mechanical effect on the 2 piezoelectrics located inside. That is, the point was in the movement itself. While the ark is being carried, the 2 stone slabs inside generate a charge and the capacitor is charging. When they stopped and set it down, charge generation would stop and the capacitor began discharging. It discharged through the lid, which was a fairly powerful high-resistance resistor. Therefore, the discharge was slow, and the ark was able to hold the charge for a long time. If the journey was long and without interruptions, then the ark charged to full capacity and threw off the excess charge through the spark gap. The cherubim started to spark and gave out a smoke screen, which was seen as God's presence, God's revelation. Also, let's not forget the reverse piezo effect, the occurrence of mechanical deformations under the influence of an electric field. This phenomenon is also called electrostriction. This means that when the ark gained sufficient charge, an electric field was created, within which the piezoelectric plates began to contract and expand, while generating an even greater charge. This indicates that, in fact, it only needed a primary charge to create an electric field, and then the ark charged itself. Of course, during a long stop, the field disappeared and the capacitor was discharged. These stops were made at the end of each day. So let's talk about this in more detail. During the transitions, the ark was covered with leather skins and fine woven linen, meaning under dense insulation. I said that I will come back to this. Of course, a capacitor of such power could not be not insulated. There is a known case when a person was electrocuted from one touch to the ark. During the turn, the ark tilted. The insulation cover shifted to one side and a man rushed to hold it, touching the uninsulated rim, which was under high voltage. The result was instant death. Furthermore, at the end of each day, the cover was removed from the ark and the tabernacle was erected from it, a tent in which the ark was kept until the morning. The tabernacle was divided into two parts by a veil. In one part, priests were allowed for worship, and the other part was called the Holy of Holies, in which the ark was located. Only the high priest Aaron could enter it, only at the set time, and only in special clothing. Question: why did he go in there? Only one reason comes to my mind: simply to move the lid and see if the stone plates have cracked. This is because if the size of the electrician's plate changes, the dynamics of the process are disturbed. For this purpose, the Aaron came in the Holy of Holies for prevention. There is another episode in the Bible that proves that the ark was discharged every night. Here is how it is written about in the primary source. And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. Joshua chapter 6. What is this about? A famous event is described here, how with the help of the Ark of the Covenant and musical trumpets, the walls of the city of Jericho were brought down. In my opinion, the instructions are pretty clear. For 6 days, you need to go around the city once, and on the 7th day, you need to go around it 7 times. Then blow into the pipes, and everyone shout out loud. What's not to get? Well, everything. You can run with pipes, with drums around any wall, and it still won't collapse. If you don't have a portable electric field with you that will amplify the sound many times over. This phenomenon even has a name: acousto-electric interaction. But more on that later. Let's go back to the ark. So for 6 days it was carried around the city once, and on the 7th day, 7 times. Why they carried it is clear. They were charging the capacitor, which in turn provided the electric field. But why such a strange algorithm? Let's figure it out. Imagine that you have some kind of container, let's say a bucket, with a measuring cup. A level is indicated on the bucket, and the task is to fill the bucket under this level with the cup. There is one clue that roughly 7 cups will go in, and one condition: no more than 1 cup per day. It seems that it could be simple. Throw in 1 cup at a time for 6 days, and on the 7th you'll finish off the rest. And if you drill a hole at the bottom of the bucket, and by morning all the water flows out, then what? Then every morning the bucket will be empty, and you have to start all over again. Then there seems to be only one way. Break the required level into 7 parts in advance, and try to catch 1/7 part with 1 cup in 6 attempts, so that on the 7th day, 7 cups are filled exactly as necessary. By the way, the expression measure 7 times could have come from there. This is exactly what they did with the ark. For the first 6 days, the ark was carried around Jericho in different circles, and after that, the intensity of the charge received was measured, comparing it to 1/7 of the power needed to collapse walls. If the charge was not enough, then the next day the distance from the city was increased, thus increasing the circumference and accordingly the charging time of the capacitor. Conversely, if the charge was too large, then the next day the adjustment was made closer to the wall. Thus, on the 7th day, the calibrated perimeter was known, along which it was necessary to carry the ark 7 times in order to gain the charge that would give the required field strength. They did just that. Then the pipes blew, people screamed, and the walls collapsed. The acousto-electric interaction, which I mentioned above, worked. It's due to the fact that during the propagation of acoustic waves in a solid material, a deformation of its crystal lattices occurs and internal crystal forces arise. When a sound wave passes through an electric field, an exchange of energy and impulse occurs between an acoustic wave and electrons. For the destruction of a solid by sound, it is not enough to get into the resonant frequency. Decibels are also important, such as vibration amplitude. It is this amplitude that the electric field provides. In short, quite simply, the ark acted as a powerful speaker for the sound of trumpets. The pipes produced the required sound frequency, and the speaker amplified it to the required power, and the walls collapsed. What conclusions can be drawn from this story? Well, at least two. First, there was a certain operator or operators who monitored this process and measured the charge on the ark. How and when they did it is a mystery. We can, of course, assume that this was done by trial and error, but it is unlikely. The risk was great. And the second, this example puts a hard period on the question of whether the ark was discharged during the night. Yes, it was discharged. Well, all that remains is to say a few words about the end of the ark's career. After King David conquered Jerusalem, he ordered the Ark of the Covenant to be solemnly transported to the city and placed under the tabernacle. When the priests leaving the ark in the Holy of Holies left it, the temple was filled with a cloud, for the glory of the Lord has filled the temple. I have already said that sparking and a smoke screen between cherubim is the usual work of a spark gap, but sources say that this time the cloud was especially large. Alternatively, a capacitor breakdown could have occurred. Considering the size of the condenser, the smoke output should have been decent. It is known that the ark crossed this last journey by oxen. That is, the instructions were violated and the ark could have gained a critical charge, after which a breakdown occurred. This version is supported by the fact that after that the ark was not used anywhere. In any case, no evidence exists of this. Each electrical appliance has its own safety mechanism, and if it is violated, the device will fail. This is typical. When David's son King Solomon built the first Jerusalem temple, the ark was moved there. But before that, it was opened. This is how the Bible talks about it. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. Only 2 stone tablets were inside. And that is correct, because nothing else could be there. Well, I guess that's all.